Hey, what's up guys? We're going to go over the Ryzen 5600 Wraith Stealth Cooler versus the Corsair H60 Liquid Cooler. The Corsair H60 Liquid Cooler is just one that I had from 2017, and I'm going to compare it to the performance against the stock Wraith Stealth Cooler that comes with the 5600X. So the test setup is it's a 5600X in my system with 3.7 gigahertz base and 4.6 gigahertz boost. Stock settings, 16 gigabytes of G.Skill Ripjaws V series, and timings are 18, 22, 22, 42, 1.35 volts. GTX 1070 Founders Edition, MSI MPG X570 Gaming plus motherboard, and the case is the Rio Toro CR1080 and two 120 intake fans and 192 millimeter fan and a 500 watt bronze power supply. So that's the specs that I'm running both of these coolers on for this test. So the way I'm testing is I'm taking the temperatures, I'm taking the games and the applications, and I'm benchmarking them with Core Temp. Before each app or game was run, Core Temp would be closed, then started up freshly before the game was launched. Then the stats of Core Temp would track the temps of the gameplay run. Numbers were recorded after the gameplay run was done. So yeah, I would record at the very end of the gameplay run and go ahead and record the temps after they were recorded. I would record the maximum Celsius. So for the gaming benchmarks, all the games are run at 4K, and all the data points are pulling data from games running at 4K low settings in each game. All the temperatures recorded after 20 minutes of gameplay, and several testing playthroughs determine their temperatures. So is cooling important on Ryzen? And that's the reason why I wanted to make this video. And the answer is yes. After 75C, someone commented on my previous video. Name is Michael S. He pointed out that the Wraith Stealth, in my Wraith Stealth Cooler, that after 75C, it causes the CPU to throttle and the frequency starts to get pulled back at 75C. Ideally, every gaming scenario or any gaming scenario or any scenario where the CPU is getting hit, you want the CPU to be below 75C to hit the 4.6 gigahertz turbo consistently. So, as I'm going to show, if you do get above 75 Celsius, you're not going to hit the turbo if you're above 75 Celsius. And pretty clearly, 3D Mark Firestrike shows that if you go above 75 Celsius, you're going to be basically oscillating between 4.3 and 4.4. You're never going to hit 4.6 on the Wraith Stealth Cooler if you're above 75 Celsius. So the average temps across 7 games between the two coolers, the Wraith Stealth average is 77 Celsius, and the average temp on the Corsair H60 is 63 Celsius. So people are going to point out maybe the coolers were installed incorrectly. Well, they were not installed incorrectly. The Wraith Stealth Cooler, I know for a fact, was installed correctly. It was fully mounted to the processor. When I took it off the processor, it was fully covered in thermal paste. There was complete contact, so this 77 Celsius average is accurate. The same with the Corsair H60. I know it's making full contact. All the cores are reporting the same exact Celsius number, so I know the H60 is fully flush with the processor. They're both accurate temperatures. They're just temperatures I got myself. So, you know, take them what you will. My test system is a normal PC with a decent case. I'd say it's probably average on airflow, and these are just temps I wanted to share with everybody. But I do know that the Wraith Stealth, when I did dismount it from the CPU, it was mounted correctly. So take that with what you will. So these are the temperatures, and we can visually see that the highest temperature for the H60 was just 69 Celsius, but in several games from Slay the Spire, Immortals Phoenix Rising, the demo, and Assassin's Creed and Apex Legends, we're running above 75 Celsius. And in a moment, I'm going to show you why that's a problem. Only three of the 4 games, Yooka-Laylee, Resident Evil 4, and Rise of the Tomb Raider, were we below 75 Celsius. So, yeah, pretty clear that the H60 provides a lot better cooling performance than the stock Wraith Stealth Cooler, and most other coolers are going to cut down the heat on the processor a lot. So definitely it's a huge advantage to be below 70 Celsius, and I think the Wraith Stealth Cooler it runs super hot with any kind of load. You see the temperatures spike insanely high. So even though AMD says that 95 Celsius is the maximum for the processor, heat does kill computer components. Heat kills most components that are mechanical or electrical. So it's definitely wise to run your Ryzen processor with lower temperatures, whether you buy a Noctua cooler, you buy a Cooler Master cooler, you buy some other aftermarket cooler. It's definitely a big advantage. But yeah, you can definitely see clearly the temps are in the 50s and 60s on the H60, and this is an H60 from 2017. I've had it for 4 years. So you know, of course, a more modern H60 or an H100i or an H150i, the higher end Corsair liquid coolers are going to perform better. But these are the temps I got, and they're all consistent and they're all pretty good. So the throttle temp. So if we look at this, throttle temp of 75, the average temps were 77 on the Wraith Stealth Cooler. So on average, you're going to be throttled if you're using the Wraith Stealth Cooler. So we can see this, the 5600X stock hit, the Wraith Stealth Cooler hits 4.6 gigahertz for a brief moment in 3D Mark Firestrike, and then it tries to hit 4.4 the rest of the way. The score on the Wraith Stealth for the CPU and the physics score was 24,412. The score on the Corsair H60 was 25,193. So 3% increase from just switching the cooler to the H60. So having better cooling, I'm getting 3% increase in my 3D Mark score just because my processor can hit the 4.6 gigahertz more consistently in the H60. So 781 points, and I'll show you guys what I mean by that. So if we take a look here, this is 3D Mark, and we look at the CPU temperature, it ends up topping out at around 83 Celsius, and it comes at about 83 Celsius, 81, 83 Celsius. And if we look at the frequency, it starts out, and this is the physics, this is the CPU test, and it hits briefly right there. You can see it hits 4.598, and then it goes down to 4.348, and it goes back up to 4.55. So, and then it drops to 4.4, drops to 4.398, and then it's 4.448. So there's that score. Now, if we go and we take a look at the liquid cooling result, you're going to see a big difference in how the processor reacts. So the processor is hitting 4.648 pretty much consistently, 4.599, and then it dips to a low of 4.549, and then it's 4.648, and then 4.548 and 4.645. So it's pretty much consistently across the H60 is consistently hitting 4.55 and 4.648, and that's a lot better. It's able to turbo and to boost a whole lot better by having a better cooler, and that's why you're seeing this 3.19% increase, because it's holding the turbo. And the stock cooler, the problem with the stock cooler is it cannot hold the turbo at 4.5 or 4.6, and that's why I wanted to make this video, because I want people to know that with the stock cooler, you're losing performance. You're not able to hold the 4.6 turbo as long, so you're losing out potentially on 3 to 4% in the processor's stock capability, because I'm not overclocking. This is just the stock out of the box performance. So this is just what I captured there as one of the lows of 4.373, and this one is 4.548. So to break it down, it's a 4% reduction in base frequency, so the lowest frequency. So 175 megahertz reduction in base frequency. The scores 781 points lower, and 3.19% lower fire strike score. So 4% reduction in base frequency. And so I'm taking the delta between the lowest frequency from the Wraith and the lowest frequency from the H60, and it was 175 megahertz. So you are reducing almost linearly, in a linear fashion. You're almost the clock speed is also very much correlated with your fire strike score in this scenario. So if you care about, what your score is in 3D Mark, or you care about how many frames you're getting in a game, just know that if you use the stock cooler, you're potentially missing out between 3 and 4%. And that could be a big deal. If you're losing 3 to 4%, let's say you're even losing 5%, you could be losing 3 frames, and 3 frames could be the difference between 27 frames, or it could be the difference between 57 frames and 60. So you are losing performance. Or if you're on a deadline and you need to render something, you're going to be rendering slower. And let's go back actually. So my main thing is that since the processor here is only hitting 59, that's why we have this pretty consistent 4.6. So that's all I really wanted to talk about mostly in this comparison, is that in games the H60 has a lower operating temperature. But then also we can clearly see that as heat hits the Wraith Stealth, it just can't boost as high, and that's kind of what's losing performance on it. In Windows, the Wraith Stealth had an idle temp of 44 Celsius, and with the Corsair H60 saw temps of 35 Celsius. So it's 20% reduction in idle temps, and 3D Mark saw temps go from 81 to 59C. There's actually typo here, is around 84, but you know, it's between 27%, you know, to 35% if we actually take it to 84. That's a typo. But in the end, you know, that's a big reduction. So reducing a bunch of heat, both at idle and also in benchmarking, I think it's much better to go with an aftermarket cooler. You can get by with the Wraith Stealth, but it's just not going to perform that well. So yeah, 4 out of 7 games tested got the 5600X to 75C and beyond, which ends up throttling the chip's frequencies. And I want to just go back and just make sure that I'm showing this again. That the reason I'm saying this 75C is when you see the temperature, it's below 75C right here on the, it's like right below 75C on the CPU temperature. But as soon as it hits the 80C, above the 75C in this area, when we look at the frequency, it's 4.6 here, and then later on it just dips when it hits the 80, and it just keeps oscillating. So that's where I'm drawing the conclusion from one of the commenters, and he was right. When we're in this 80 range, when we're in this 80 range, we're not able to hit 4.6, and we're oscillating between 4.3 and 4.4. So yeah, with that, I'd say don't use the Wraith Stealth Cooler if you can for gaming or any CPU heavy workloads, because you're going to be losing 4% in turbo frequency, potentially in the base turbo frequency, and the chip's going to be running way hotter, and heat is what kills components in the end. A lot of people on YouTube and PCU builders, they say heat kills components, and yeah, if something is getting extremely hot in your case or in your computer, the more heat it has and the higher temperatures you're running it at, you're going to just kill the component faster. So even though AMD says anything below 95 Celsius is fine, you can go by that if you want to go by that, but I think running the chip below 70, between 60 and 70, or below 80 is what most people recommend overall. What I've seen on Reddit and what I've seen from people I know myself, the consensus is below 80 generally, but as we've seen, you want to be below 75C if you want to hit that 4.6 gigahertz consistently. If you don't care about frequency and you don't care about thermals, then you can just run the stock cooler and you'll be fine. But if you do care about the longevity of your processor and hitting 4.6 consistently, I would highly recommend an aftermarket cooler. I think the Wraith Stealth, in my opinion, should be used only in lighter workloads like Netflix or Chrome browsing, but for high performance tasks, you'll get consistently cooler temperatures and better boosting potential with an aftermarket cooler. And yeah, I stand by that statement. You know, clearly 3D Mark is also an interesting test, because when it does the physics score, that's just hammering the CPU for 15 seconds and it grabs all that data. So hammering the CPU with a burst of data to crunch those numbers, clearly the Wraith Stealth Cooler can't even cool the processor well enough for a 15-second burst from a benchmarking tool. So that's probably going to translate into a lot of other workloads that really heat up the processor a lot. So yeah, these are just my metrics. This is my review, and I hope it helps somebody figure out if they want to use the Wraith Stealth Cooler. You know, if you're on a tight budget, maybe wait a few months. You can use the Wraith Stealth Cooler for 6 months, 8 months, a year if you don't got the money to immediately buy something that's better and that'll cool the processor. It's nice that they include it in the box, but it's definitely something I would not recommend people using for several years. I think it's something to get by with for a few months or maybe a year or two. You can use it, but I would think that, yeah, I mean, people want to get, you know, higher boost and higher performance, and 4%, it's decent. 4% I think is enough to warrant investing, you know, $30 to $40 and get a decent cooler. So that's it, guys. I hope you enjoyed. See you later.